The crystal glasses clinked as we toasted to new beginnings. Mom smiled tightly as Emma giggled, spilling a drop of sparkling cider on the pristine tablecloth. The slap came without warning. My 5-year-old daughter's head jerked sideways, her lip split instantly. Blood trickled onto her holiday dress as silence engulfed our dining room. My mother straightened her napkin as if nothing happened. That's when Tyler, my 10-year-old son, stood up. "Grandma," he said calmly, "should I show everyone what you told me to keep secret?" My stomach dropped at Tyler's words. What secret could my 10-year-old possibly share with his grandmother that I knew nothing about? The dining room fell eerily quiet, the only sound being Emma's soft whimper as she touched her bleeding lip with trembling fingers. Growing up with Gladys Porter as a mother meant living in constant fear of disappointing her. Our home in suburban Pennsylvania looked perfect from the outside. Fresh paint every 3 years, immaculate garden beds that won neighborhood awards, and family portraits where we all smiled with practiced precision. Behind closed doors, however, my childhood consisted of walking on eggshells around a woman whose love seemed permanently conditional. "Straighten your shoulders, Olga," she would snap when I was just 7. "No one respects a girl who slouches." I met David during my sophomore year of college. He was studying architecture while I pursued elementary education. Our connection was immediate and profound. What drew me to him most was his genuine warmth, something foreign to me after growing up in Gladys's emotional deep freeze. When he first met my mother, he whispered to me afterward, "Something's off there. Are you okay?" No one had ever asked me that before. After our wedding, Gladys maintained a careful distance, showing up at major holidays with expensive gifts and thin smiles. When I became pregnant with Tyler, something shifted. Suddenly, she wanted to be involved in everything, from nursery colors to pediatrician selection. David watched with growing concern as she attempted to orchestrate our lives from the sidelines. "Your mother seems very invested in how we raise our kids," David said one night as we lay in bed, his arm protective around my shoulders. "She just wants to help," I replied, the automatic defense mechanism kicking in despite knowing better. "Help doesn't usually come with this many opinions, Olga." The tension intensified when Emma arrived 5 years later. My mother made no secret of her disapproval when I decided to breastfeed longer than she thought appropriate, or when we chose a progressive preschool instead of the traditional one she preferred. Every decision became a battleground. My father, Thomas, had always been the buffer between us, his gentle nature softening Gladys's sharp edges. His sudden heart attack 8 months ago removed that protection. Without him, Gladys's controlling behavior intensified to levels I hadn't experienced since childhood. "You need to set boundaries," David urged after one particularly tense Sunday lunch, where Gladys criticized everything from Emma's hair ribbons to Tyler's posture. "She's grieving," I said, though the excuse felt increasingly hollow. 3 weeks before New Year's, my phone bill showed something strange. Multiple calls between Tyler's phone and my mother's number, always during school hours when he should have been in 5th grade math or science. When I casually asked him about it, his eyes darted away. "Just checking in on Grandma since Grandpa died," he mumbled before quickly changing the subject. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But something in his avoidance triggered alarm bells I'd been conditioned to ignore my entire life. The invitation to spend New Year's Eve at Gladys's house came with her typical lack of flexibility. "I've already ordered the prime rib. 6 o'clock sharp. The children should dress properly." Not a question, but a statement of what would happen. David suggested we decline. "We could start our own tradition this year," he said, eyes pleading. "One dinner," I insisted. "We go, we eat, we leave early." Dad would have wanted us to include her. David reluctantly agreed, though his jaw remained tight as he helped Tyler with his tie and zipped Emma into her favorite holiday dress, the one with tiny silver stars along the hem. As we loaded the kids into our SUV for the 20-minute drive to my childhood home, snowflakes began to fall, dusting the world in deceiving innocence. "Remember," I told the children, "best behavior for Grandma tonight." "Does she have presents?" Emma asked, eyes bright with 5-year-old hope. "Maybe," I answered, thinking of the carefully wrapped boxes I'd bought on Gladys's behalf, knowing she would have forgotten. What I didn't know then was how completely our lives would change before midnight struck to usher in the new year. I couldn't have predicted that the family secrets Tyler carried would blow apart decades of carefully maintained facades. And I had no idea that my mother's hand striking my daughter's face would finally give me the strength to break free from a lifetime of controlled silence. Gladys's home gleamed with holiday perfection as we arrived. Every surface sparkled, from the crystal chandelier to the polished silver laid out on the dining table. Winter, white roses and amaryllis bloomed in strategic locations throughout the house. A fire crackled in the living room hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. "You're 3 minutes late," my mother said in lieu of a greeting, her critical gaze sweeping over us. She wore a tailored navy dress, her silver hair coiled into an immaculate chignon. Not a strand dared fall out of place. "Sorry, Mom." "The roads are getting slick," I explained, helping Emma with her coat. "Weather reports have been available all day, Olga. Planning accordingly isn't difficult." She turned her attention to Tyler, her expression softening artificially. "There's my handsome grandson. Come give Grandma a proper hello." Tyler approached her stiffly for a brief hug. I noticed he kept his eyes down, something unusual for my normally confident son. David's parents, Susan and Jack Henderson, arrived minutes after us, bringing warmth and genuine affection that immediately lightened the atmosphere. Susan swept Emma into a hug, complimenting her dress, while Jack playfully ruffled Tyler's hair. "My goodness, you've grown another inch since Christmas," Susan exclaimed to Tyler. My brother Andy and his wife Beth completed our gathering. Andy had always been Gladys's favorite, the son who rarely questioned her authority and followed the life path she'd outlined for him. Corporate law, marriage to Beth from the right family, and a house 3 blocks from our mother's. Perfect on paper, though the tight lines around his eyes told a different story. "Hey sis," Andy said, hugging me briefly. "How are you holding up?" "Fine," I responded automatically, the word so ingrained it fell from my lips without thought. Gladys directed everyone to their assigned seats at the dining table, which had been extended to accommodate our group of 10. Crystal wine glasses caught the light from the chandelier, and fine china plates waited for the elaborate meal my mother had prepared. "Emma, sit up straight," Gladys instructed my daughter before we'd even begun eating. "Young ladies don't slouch." Emma immediately stiffened, her little shoulders pulling back unnaturally. I caught David's eye across the table, his concern mirroring my own. "The table looks lovely, Gladys," Susan offered kindly. "Thank you." Proper presentation has always been important to me, something I tried to instill in my children. Her pointed glance in my direction didn't go unnoticed. As Gladys brought out course after perfect course, the tension at the table thickened. She commented on everything, from Emma's table manners to Tyler's portion sizes. Each observation came wrapped in the guise of helpful guidance, but the barbs beneath were unmistakable. "Emma, smaller bites, please. No one wants to watch you chew like that." "Tyler, a growing boy needs protein. Take more roast and less potatoes." "Olga, perhaps you should help your daughter cut her meat. She's making a mess." The children grew increasingly uncomfortable. Tyler barely spoke, focusing intently on his plate, while Emma's initial excitement dimmed with each correction. "Can we light sparklers at midnight, Grandma?" Emma asked during a brief lull, her voice hopeful. "Certainly not. Sparklers are dangerous and inappropriate for children your age. Your mother should have taught you that." Emma's face fell. "But Mommy lets us have sparklers in the backyard." Gladys's eyes narrowed. "Well, that explains a lot about your behavior, doesn't it?" "Mom, that's enough," I said quietly, feeling David's supportive gaze. "I'm simply pointing out that inconsistent parenting leads to confused children," Gladys replied smoothly. "If you established proper boundaries, Emma wouldn't be constantly fidgeting and interrupting adult conversations." My daughter's lower lip trembled as she tried to sit even straighter in her chair. My heart ached, seeing her little body so rigid with effort. "I think Emma's behavior is perfectly age-appropriate," Susan interjected gently. "Well, we have different standards in this family," Gladys replied icily. As dessert was served, Emma's excitement returned briefly at the sight of the elaborate chocolate mousse. She reached across the table for a dinner roll, accidentally knocking over her glass of sparkling cider. The liquid splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, creating a spreading golden stain. "I'm sorry, Grandma," Emma gasped, her eyes wide with fear. It happened so fast. Gladys's hand shot out, striking Emma's face with such force that my daughter's head snapped sideways. The sound of the slap echoed through the suddenly silent room. A thin line of blood appeared on Emma's lower lip, where it had split against her teeth. I froze in shock, my body unable to move as my brain struggled to process what had just happened. David Half rose from his chair, his face flushed with anger. Susan gasped audibly, while Jack set down his fork with a deliberate clink. Emma didn't cry. She just touched her lip with trembling fingers, her eyes huge with confusion and betrayal, as she stared at the blood on her fingertips. "Children must learn consequences," Gladys said, calmly returning to her dessert as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. "A little discipline builds character." That's when Tyler stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. His face had gone completely white, but his voice remained steady. "Grandma," he said, looking directly at Gladys, "should I show everyone what you told me to keep secret?" The room grew impossibly quieter. Gladys's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Tyler, this isn't the time for games," she said sharply. "It's not a game," my son replied, reaching for his jacket hung on the back of his chair. From the inside pocket, he pulled out his phone. "Should I tell everyone about how you said Mom and Dad are getting divorced? About how they're planning to send Emma away to a special school because she's too difficult to handle?" My jaw dropped. "What?" Tyler turned to me, his eyes filling with tears. "Grandma told me not to tell anyone, but she said I needed to know because soon our family would change. She said Emma was going to be sent away because she has too many problems, and you and Dad couldn't handle her anymore." The blood drained from my face as I looked from my son to my mother. "That's absolutely not true." Gladys set down her utensils with precision. "Tyler is obviously confused. Children often misunderstand adult conversations." "I'm not confused," Tyler insisted, his voice growing stronger. "You told me last Tuesday when you picked me up from school. You said Mom and Dad were keeping it secret until after the holidays, but that I should be prepared because I'm the oldest." David stood now, his voice dangerously quiet. "You've been picking our son up from school without our knowledge or permission?" The facade finally cracked. Gladys's perfectly composed expression faltered as she realized the depth of what had been exposed. "I was merely trying to prepare the boy for what's clearly coming," she said defensively. "Anyone can see your marriage is failing. The way you coddle those children, especially that one." She gestured dismissively toward Emma, who had started to cry silently, tears mixing with the blood on her lip. In that moment, as my daughter's blood stained her holiday dress and my son stood trembling with the weight of manufactured secrets, something fundamental shifted inside me. The lifetime of fear and compliance shattered as completely as the perfect family image Gladys had cultivated for decades. "We're leaving, now." David's voice cut through the charged atmosphere as he rose from his chair and moved toward Emma. He gently lifted our daughter from her seat, cradling her against his chest. The front of her dress was spotted with blood, her small body shaking with silent sobs. "Olga, don't be dramatic," my mother said, her voice regaining its commanding tone. "The child is fine, a small consequence for careless behavior." Susan stood next, her normally gentle demeanor replaced by cold fury. "That was not a consequence, Gladys. That was assault on a 5-year-old child." "How dare you judge my parenting in my own home?" Gladys snapped. "Parenting?" Jack's voice boomed unexpectedly. "Is that what you call striking a kindergartner across the face?" I found myself frozen between action and a lifetime of conditioned compliance. Tyler moved to my side, slipping his hand into mine. The contact broke my paralysis. "Emma needs ice for her lip," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "I'll get it," Beth offered, hurrying toward the kitchen. Andy remained seated, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. "Mom, what were you thinking? You can't hit someone else's child." "She's my granddaughter," Gladys replied, as if this justified everything, and clearly in need of proper discipline, since her parents refused to provide it. Beth returned with ice wrapped in a kitchen towel. David gently pressed it against Emma's swelling lip as she whimpered. "We should take her to urgent care," I said, finally finding my voice and my courage. Her lip might need stitches. For heaven's sake, Olga. It's a split lip, not a severed limb, my mother scoffed. Don't you dare minimize this, David said, his voice tight with controlled rage. You struck our daughter hard enough to draw blood. You've been manipulating our son behind our backs. You've been lying to him about our marriage and Emma's future. Tyler tugged at my hand. Mom, there's more. His voice was small, but determined. Grandma gave me a special phone to call her with. She said I should use it to tell her when you and Dad fight. A what? I stared at my son in disbelief. Tyler reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small, basic cell phone. She said to keep it hidden and use it to call her anytime you guys argued or said bad things about her. She wanted me to tell her everything that happens at our house. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. My mother had not only been lying to my child but had effectively turned him into her spy, creating a secret communication channel to monitor our family. Give me that, David said, taking the burner phone from Tyler. He examined it briefly before slipping it into his pocket. We're done here. As we gathered our things to leave, Gladys remained at the head of the table, her posture rigid with indignation. You're overreacting as usual, Olga. This is why your father always worried about your emotional stability. The casual cruelty of her words sliced through me. My father would be ashamed of what you did tonight, I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. We loaded the children into our car, Emma still clutching the ice pack to her lip, Tyler unnaturally quiet in the back seat. Susan and Jack followed us out, promising to check in tomorrow. Should we take her to the emergency room? I asked David as he started the car. There's an urgent care center off Highway 9 that's open until 10, he replied, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. We'll get her checked there. The 20-minute drive passed in tense silence, broken only by Emma's occasional sniffles. In the rearview mirror, I could see Tyler staring out the window, his young face troubled beyond his years. At the urgent care center, a kind doctor examined Emma's lip under bright lights. She won't need stitches, but there is a small laceration inside her mouth, she explained. What happened? David and I exchanged glances. She was slapped across the face, I admitted, shame and anger warring within me. By her grandmother. The doctor's expression remained neutral, but she wrote something in Emma's chart. I'll need to document this injury, she said professionally. It's standard procedure for injuries that could be considered non-accidental. While Emma was being treated, Tyler sat beside me in the waiting area. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, leaning against my side. For what, sweetheart? For not telling you sooner about Grandma's phone and the things she said. His voice cracked. She told me you'd be mad if you knew we were talking, that it was our special secret. But then she hurt Emma, and I couldn't keep the secret anymore. I wrapped my arm around him, pulling him close. You did exactly the right thing, Tyler. None of this is your fault. Grandma's been meeting with me every week, he continued, the words tumbling out now. She picks me up from school early on Tuesdays when I'm supposed to be in music class. The school thinks it's okay, because she's on the approved list. My heart sank further. How long has this been happening? Since October, he admitted. After Grandpa's funeral, she told me since he was gone, she needed me to be the man in the family and help her keep an eye on things. The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculation. My 10-year-old son had been carrying the weight of adult lies for months, torn between loyalty to his grandmother and protection of his family. When we finally returned home that night, neither child wanted to sleep alone. We made an exception to our usual rules and created a makeshift bed of blankets on our bedroom floor, allowing both children to stay close. Is it true what Tyler said Grandma told him? Emma asked in a small voice as I tucked the blankets around her. Am I going to be sent away? Absolutely not, David assured her, sitting on the floor beside our children. No one is sending you anywhere, ever. Grandma told Tyler things that weren't true. Why would she lie? Emma's question cut to the heart of everything. I struggled for an answer that a 5-year-old could comprehend when I barely understood it myself. Sometimes adults do wrong things because they're hurting inside or because they want to control situations, I finally said. But that doesn't make it okay. Is Grandma going to jail for hitting me? Emma's swollen lip gave her words a slight lisp. No, sweetheart, I said gently. But you won't have to see her for a long time, and she will never hurt you again, I promise. That night, as the children finally drifted to sleep, David and I lay awake in our bed, speaking in whispered tones. I knew something was off with your mother, but this. David shook his head in disbelief. This is calculated psychological abuse, Olga. Of our children. Of you. I should have seen it, I whispered back, tears sliding silently into my pillow. I should have protected them better. We both should have, David acknowledged, taking my hand. But it stops now. Tomorrow, we change the emergency contact forms at both schools. We document everything Tyler told us. And we find a family therapist who can help us navigate this. As I finally drifted toward uneasy sleep in the early hours of the new year, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. The cycle of manipulation and fear that had defined my relationship with my mother would not extend to another generation. Whatever it took, I would protect my children from the damage I had normalized for too long. The morning light filtered through our bedroom blinds, illuminating the makeshift bed where our children still slept. Emma's lip had swollen to twice its normal size, a vivid purple bruise spreading across her chin. Tyler lay curled protectively toward his sister, even in sleep maintaining his vigilance. David had already made calls to both schools, removing Gladys from all approved contact lists. We need to talk to Tyler's principal directly, he said, pouring coffee into travel mugs. Find out exactly how often she's been pulling him from class. I'll go to my mother's today, I decided, the words feeling both terrifying and necessary. I need answers, David. How deep does this go? You shouldn't go alone, he countered. I have to. This is between me and her. After arranging for Susan to watch the children, I drove to my childhood home with my stomach in knots. The pristine colonial looked exactly the same in daylight, nothing in its perfect exterior suggesting the emotional violence contained within. Gladys answered the door in a crisp, beige sweater set, her face a mask of composure. I expected you yesterday, she said, stepping aside to let me in. Come to apologize for your dramatic exit, I presume. The familiar condescension nearly broke my resolve. I forced myself to remember Emma's bleeding lip, Tyler's burdened eyes. You struck my child, I said, standing in the foyer rather than following her into the living room. You've been removing my son from school without permission. You gave him a secret phone to spy on us. You told him lies about his family's future. I was protecting him from the instability you've created, she replied without hesitation. Your parenting choices are concerning, Olga. Always have been. What choices exactly? Loving my children? Allowing them to be children? Not hitting them when they spill a drink? Your permissiveness is creating weak, undisciplined children. Tyler needs a strong hand to guide him toward proper manhood. And Emma, she shook her head dismissively, that child has been indulged into uselessness. She's 5 years old, I said incredulously. Age is no excuse for poor behavior. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. We won't be seeing you for a while, Mom. The children need time to recover from what happened. Don't be ridiculous. I expect to see them this weekend as usual. That's not happening. Not until we've all had counseling and established some boundaries. Her expression hardened. You've always been dramatic, Olga. This is why your father worried about your emotional state. Stop using Dad against me. He's not here to defend himself. Perhaps if he were, he'd talk some sense into you. Something in her certainty made me pause. Dad knew how you treated me. He didn't always agree with it. A flicker of something crossed her face before she regained control. Your father and I were unified in our parenting approach. I didn't believe her. Something about her quick defense triggered a memory of hushed arguments, of my father's gentle hand on my shoulder after one of Mother's corrections. I need to use the bathroom, I said abruptly, needing a moment to gather my thoughts. Use the powder room down here, Gladys directed. I'll use the one upstairs, I replied, already moving toward the staircase that led to my old bedroom and the master suite. Olga, that's inappropriate, she called after me, but I was already halfway up, driven by an impulse I couldn't name. The upstairs hallway was unchanged, family photos arranged in perfect chronological order. I paused at my father's study, the door slightly ajar. Gladys had always kept it locked when he was alive, his private domain respected even by her. The fact that it was open now seemed significant. I slipped inside, breathing in the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco and leather chair. The room was meticulously organized, not a paper out of place on his desk. My eyes were drawn to his filing cabinet, where he'd kept family documents and correspondence. The top drawer opened smoothly, revealing color, coded folders. One labeled Olga caught my attention immediately. Inside were school records, medical information, and a smaller envelope marked personal concerns. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a stack of handwritten letters in my father's distinctive script. They were addressed to me, but had never been sent. "My dearest Olga," the first one began, dated just after my 18th birthday. "There are things I should have told you face to face but lacked the courage to say. Your mother's expectations for you have always been unreasonable, her methods too harsh. I failed you by not intervening more strongly, by prioritizing peace in our marriage over your emotional well-being. For this, I can only ask your forgiveness, though I don't deserve it." Tears blurred my vision as I skimmed through letter after letter, each documenting my father's private regrets, his awareness of Gladys's controlling nature, his concern for my future. The most recent was dated just weeks before his death. "I worry about your children now, especially as your mother becomes more involved in their lives. The patterns I see emerging mirror what happened with you. Please be vigilant, Olga. Be stronger than I was. Protect them from what I could not protect you from." "What are you doing in here?" I jumped at my mother's voice from the doorway, instinctively clutching the letters to my chest. "These were meant for me," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "Your father's private papers are not yours to rummage through," she snapped, moving toward me. "He wanted me to have these. He wanted me to know the truth." "What truth? That your father was weak? That he undermined my parenting at every opportunity? That he coddled you just as you coddle your children?" As she approached, I noticed a leather-bound book on the desk, partially hidden under a newspaper. The word incidents was embossed on its cover. I reached for it before she could stop me. "Put that down immediately," Gladys demanded, her composure finally cracking. I opened it to find meticulous documentation of what my mother considered parenting failures on my part. Dates, times, behaviors she had witnessed in my children, comments overheard, all annotated with her judgments. The most recent entry described Emma's defiant posture at Christmas dinner and how it demonstrated Olga's failure to instill proper respect. "You've been documenting my parenting?" I asked, incredulous. "Creating some kind of case against me?" "Someone needed to maintain standards," she replied unapologetically. "Your father is gone. Someone must ensure those children don't grow up without proper guidance." A cold realization washed over me. This isn't about the children at all, is it? This is about control. You're trying to take control of my family just like you controlled me. Don't be melodramatic. I'm trying to save those children from your incompetence. I tucked both the letters and the notebook under my arm. "I'm taking these with me." "Those are my private property," she protested. "Actually, Dad's letters are addressed to me. And this book," I held up the notebook, "documents your obsession with my family. I think both will be very interesting to the family therapist we're seeing next week." Her face paled. "Therapy? You're taking family matters to an outsider?" "Yes, because this isn't normal, Mom. None of this is normal or healthy." As I moved toward the door, she blocked my path. "If you leave with those, don't expect to remain in this family." The threat that would have once devastated me now felt almost liberating. If being in this family means allowing you to manipulate and hurt my children, then perhaps it's time to redefine what family means to us. I left with my father's letters and my mother's incriminating notebook, my hands shaking but my resolve strengthening with each step. In my car, I discovered another disturbing item tucked inside the notebook. A business card for a family law attorney with notes about grandparents' rights and custodial considerations based on parental instability. The drive home was a blur of emotions, decades of suppressed realizations crashing through the carefully constructed walls of denial I'd built around my childhood. By the time I reached our driveway, one thing was crystal clear. This conflict had moved beyond a family disagreement into something potentially dangerous for my children's well-being. David and Susan were in the kitchen when I arrived home. Emma was napping, her body still recovering from the shock of the previous night. Tyler sat at the dining table, listlessly pushing crayons around a drawing pad. "Show him," I said to David, handing over the lawyer's card and the notebook. David's face darkened as he flipped through the pages. "She's been documenting everything, creating a paper trail." Susan looked over his shoulder, her expression horrified. "This looks like she's building a case for some kind of intervention. She's considering seeking grandparent visitation rights," I explained. "Maybe even custody, based on these notes." "On what grounds?" Susan asked incredulously. "Apparently, my emotional instability and permissive parenting are damaging the children. The absurdity would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying." That afternoon, we had our first emergency session with Dr. Marlene Reed, a family therapist specializing in childhood trauma. Tyler sat stiffly between David and me on the comfortable couch in her office, while Emma played with therapeutic toys in the corner. "Tyler, can you tell me about the conversations with your grandmother?" Dr. Reed asked gently. Tyler looked at his sneakers. "Grandma said that I needed to be the man of the family now that Grandpa was gone. She said Mom sometimes makes bad choices because she's too emotional, and I needed to help protect Emma." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She said Dad works too much and doesn't really care about us the way she does." Each word was a fresh wound, the systematic undermining of our family bonds, laid bare through the innocent recounting of a child. "And how did those conversations make you feel?" Dr. Reed prompted. "Scared," Tyler admitted, "and confused. Because Mom and Dad don't act like Grandma said. But Grandma said adults hide things from kids to protect them, so maybe they were just pretending everything was okay." Dr. Reed's assessment at the end of the session was clear. "Your son is displaying signs of significant anxiety due to being placed in an inappropriate role of family confidant and messenger. Your daughter is showing early signs of trauma response. I'm concerned about the level of manipulation described and would recommend limited to no contact with the grandmother until we've had time to process these events." As January progressed, more disturbing discoveries emerged. David found evidence that Gladys had been monitoring our financial records, possibly looking for signs of instability she could document. My brother Andy reluctantly admitted that our mother had been making concerning comments about my parenting for years, laying groundwork within the extended family. Most alarmingly, an email from Emma's preschool teacher arrived, mentioning a concerned conversation with Mrs. Porter regarding Emma's home environment. My mother had been systematically contacting my daughter's teachers, sharing her concerns about our home life. Emma developed nightmares, waking screaming about Grandma's angry hands. Tyler's grades began slipping as he struggled with the burden of his grandmother's manipulation. And I found myself sliding into a depression deepened by guilt that I hadn't recognized the danger signs earlier. "We need to talk to a lawyer," David finally said one night after both children were asleep. "Your mother is building a case against us. We need to protect our family legally." As much as I wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding that could be resolved within the family, the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. My mother wasn't just a difficult grandmother with boundary issues. She was actively working to undermine our parental authority and possibly seeking legal means to insert herself permanently into our children's lives. The notebook, the secret meetings with Tyler, the communications with Emma's school, the consultation with a family law attorney all pointed to a coordinated campaign that had begun long before the New Year's Eve slap that finally brought it into the open. As I lay awake that night listening to David's steady breathing beside me, I realized with cold clarity that the woman who had raised me was not simply flawed or old-fashioned in her parenting approach. She was dangerous to the emotional well-being of my children. And for the first time in my life, I was prepared to stand against her, whatever the cost. By mid-January, the fallout from New Year's Eve had permeated every aspect of our lives. Emma's physical wound had healed, the split lip now just a faint line, but the emotional damage manifested in ways that broke my heart daily. My once confident 5-year-old, now startled at loud noises, and had reverted to behaviors she'd outgrown years ago. Bedwetting became a nightly occurrence. Her preschool teacher reported she'd become withdrawn during group activities, a shadow of her formerly exuberant self. She asked me today if she was bad, David said one evening, his voice tight with controlled anger. She wanted to know if that's why Grandma hurt her, because she was a bad girl. Tyler's struggle took different forms. His grades plummeted from straight, as to barely passing. The school counselor called to report. He'd been involved in a shoving match with another boy, completely out of character for our typically conflict-averse son. At home, he alternated between aggressive outbursts and periods of silent withdrawal, spending hours alone in his room. "I feel like I can't trust anyone," he confessed during a therapy session with Dr. Reed. "Grandma said she loved me, but she lied to me and hurt Emma. What if other people who say they love me are lying too?" The collateral damage extended beyond our immediate family. My mother had begun what could only be described as a smear campaign, reaching out to relatives, family, friends, even neighbors, sharing her concerns about my parenting and mental stability. Long-time friends suddenly became awkward around me, and invitations to social gatherings dwindled. Gladys called me yesterday, my cousin Jennifer admitted when I finally confronted her about her sudden distance. She said you were having some kind of breakdown, that the children might need emergency placement soon. She asked if we would be willing to take them temporarily. The systematic isolation felt suffocating. Some family members took sides immediately, most aligning with my mother out of years of conditioning to her authority. Others maintained uncomfortable neutrality, unwilling to get involved in what they saw as a private family matter. Pressure to reconcile mounted from unexpected quarters. "Family is everything, Olga," Andy said during an uncomfortable phone call 3 weeks after the incident. "Mom is getting older. Dad's gone. Do you really want the kids to lose their only grandmother over one bad night?" "One bad night?" I repeated incredulously. "She struck Emma hard enough to split her lip. She's been manipulating Tyler for months. She's actively trying to undermine our family. She's worried about the kids," Andy insisted. "Her methods might be old, fashioned, but her heart's in the right place." "Her heart is focused entirely on control," I countered. "Has she shown any remorse? Any acknowledgement that hitting Emma was wrong?" His silence was answer enough. The professional consequences began to manifest as well. David came home one evening, his face ashen. "Your mother called my firm today," he said, loosening his tie with jerky movements. "She spoke to Stuart Miller directly." Stuart was the senior partner at David's architectural firm, a man whose opinion could make or break careers. "What did she say?" I asked, dreading the answer. "That she was concerned about my family situation affecting my work performance. That I might be dealing with domestic issues that could impact client relationships." His voice was hollow. Stuart called me into his office afterward. He was understanding but concerned. Said they value my contributions, but need to maintain the firm's reputation. The implicit threat to David's career added financial stress to our already fragile situation. If he lost his position, would that become ammunition in my mother's campaign against our fitness as parents? The crisis reached a breaking point one freezing February afternoon. I was at my classroom desk, grading papers during my planning period, when my cell phone rang with the school's main office number. "Mrs. Henderson? This is Marilyn from Franklin Elementary. There's been an incident involving Emma." My heart stopped. "Is she hurt?" "No, but there was an attempted unauthorized pickup. Your mother arrived claiming a family emergency and tried to remove Emma from her classroom." I gripped the phone tighter. "My mother is explicitly forbidden from contact with Emma. It's documented in her file." "Yes, which is why the front office stopped her. But she became insistent. We had to initiate lockdown protocols and call security. Emma became very distressed during the situation. I raced to Emma's school to find my daughter huddled in the nurse's office, trembling uncontrollably. When she saw me, she launched herself into my arms with a desperation that tore at my soul. "Grandma said you were hurt?" she sobbed against my shoulder. "She said I needed to go with her because you were in the hospital." I told her no, but she got really angry. The school principal confirmed that Gladys had claimed I'd been in a car accident and was hospitalized. When questioned about why she hadn't followed proper emergency protocols, she'd become belligerent, demanding to see Emma immediately. Security had escorted her from the property, but not before she'd created a scene that frightened students and staff alike. "We've filed a police report," the principal informed me, "and we'll be implementing additional security measures for Emma's protection." That evening, as I recounted the events to David, something inside me finally shattered. The weight of the past 6 weeks came crashing down, and I found myself curled on our bedroom floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "I can't do this anymore," I gasped between heaving breaths. "She's destroying our family. The children are suffering. Your job is at risk. Everyone thinks I'm having some kind of breakdown." David gathered me in his arms, his own eyes wet with tears. "Maybe we should consider moving," he suggested. "Start fresh somewhere she can't reach us so easily." "Run away? Leave our home, your job, my teaching position? Let her win?" "This isn't about winning, Olga. It's about protecting our children." The idea of uprooting our lives because of my mother's actions filled me with a complex mixture of defeat and rage. If we run, the children learn that bullies and abusers have the power, that victims should hide rather than stand up for themselves. "Then what do we do?" David asked softly. I had no answer that night. We held each other in the dim light of our bedroom, listening to the occasional whimper from Emma's room as nightmares disturbed her sleep. The next day, I called in sick to work and returned to my childhood home while my mother was at her weekly bridge club. Using the spare key she never knew I'd kept, I entered the silent house with a sense of transgression and purpose. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found myself back in my father's study. The filing cabinet remained partially open from my last visit, and I was drawn to a lower drawer I hadn't examined before. Inside was a folder simply labeled Thomas Porter, Personal. The contents painted a picture of my father I'd never fully seen. Journal entries spanning decades documented his growing concern about my mother's controlling behavior, his failed attempts to moderate her harshness toward me, and later, his worry about her influence on Tyler and Emma. One entry, dated just 2 months before his death, struck me with particular force. "Gladys was upset again today about Olga allowing Tyler to quit the piano lessons. Said the boy needs discipline, structure. I reminded her they're not our children to raise. She said something that chilled me, that perhaps they should be, if Olga and David aren't up to the task. I fear what she might do if I'm not here to temper her interference. I should speak to Olga directly, but the courage fails me. Always, the courage fails me when it comes to standing against Gladys." Tucked behind the journal was a sealed envelope addressed to me, in my father's handwriting, marked, "In case of emergency." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. "My dearest Olga," it began. "If you're reading this, I am gone, and my worst fears about your mother's behavior have manifested. I've suspected for some time that Gladys suffers from a psychological condition that drives her need for absolute control. In the early years of our marriage, I believed I could moderate her extremes, protect you from the worst of her criticism. I failed in that duty, allowing her to damage your sense of self, worth in ways I can never atone for. I've consulted privately with Dr. Edward Harmon about her behavior patterns. He believes she shows strong indicators of narcissistic personality disorder with controlling behaviors. I include his contact information should you ever need professional guidance in managing her interference in your life or your children's lives. Know this, my darling girl. You are stronger than either of us ever acknowledged. When the time comes to protect your own children from the damage that shaped you, I pray you'll find the courage I lacked. Your mother's love has always been conditional, but yours need not be. Break the cycle, Olga. Stand firm where I wavered. With eternal love and regret, Dad." I sat on my father's leather chair, the letter clutched to my chest, and wept for the man who had seen the truth but couldn't bring himself to act decisively. For the child I had been, and for my own children now caught in the same toxic dynamic. When I returned home that afternoon, I found David in our home office, surrounded by printouts of emails, financial documents, and therapy reports. "I've been building our case," he said without preamble, "documenting everything from the New Year's Eve incident forward. The unauthorized school pickup attempt gives us grounds for a restraining order, Olga. We have enough now." I placed my father's letter on the desk between us. "We have more than you know." That night, after the children were finally asleep, David and I sat at our kitchen table with 2 legal pads, mapping out a strategy, not just for defense, but for reclaiming our family's peace and safety. The path forward wouldn't be easy or quick, but for the first time since that fateful New Year's Eve, I felt something long dormant stirring within me. The absolute certainty that protecting my children was worth whatever battle lay ahead. The morning after discovering my father's letter, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. The path forward was neither simple nor guaranteed, but the alternative, continuing to react defensively while my mother systematically undermined our family, was unacceptable. "We need legal protection first," David said over breakfast, the children still asleep upstairs. "The school incident gives us grounds for a temporary restraining order." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "And we need allies. People who've seen my mother's behavior firsthand and can corroborate our concerns." Our first appointment was with Judith Winters, a family law attorney recommended by Dr. Reed. Her office walls displayed children's artwork alongside her legal credentials, an intentional reminder of what was truly at stake in her practice. "Based on what you've shared," she said, after reviewing our documentation, "we have grounds for a temporary restraining order preventing your mother from contacting your children or approaching their schools. The unauthorized attempt to remove Emma from school is particularly concerning from a legal standpoint." "Will that be enough?" I asked, thinking of my mother's determination and resources. "It's a starting point," Judith replied honestly. "But we should prepare for the possibility that she'll petition for grandparent visitation rights. Some states recognize these rights under certain circumstances." "She struck our child," David said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Surely that disqualifies her." "It should," Judith agreed. "But courts tend to favor family reconciliation when possible. We'll need to demonstrate an ongoing pattern of behavior that threatens your children's well-being, not just a single incident." The documentation we'd been gathering took on new urgency. My father's letter, the journal entries, the notebook of incidents, Tyler's testimony about the secret meetings and phone, the school's report of the attempted unauthorized pickup all became pieces in the legal shield we were constructing around our family. After the restraining order was granted, giving us temporary legal protection, we turned to building our support network. My first call was to Sarah Matthews, my childhood best friend who had witnessed firsthand my mother's controlling behavior during our youth. "I always knew something was off with your mom," Sarah said, when we met for coffee. "Remember when she grounded you for getting an A- in algebra? Or when she threw away your art project because the colors were inappropriate? I need you to document those memories," I explained. "In case this goes further legally." Sarah squeezed my hand. "Whatever you need. I watched you disappear a little more every year growing up. I'm not letting her do that to your kids." David's parents became our staunchest allies, providing not only emotional support, but practical assistance with childcare and school pickups to ensure the children were never vulnerable to another attempted contact. "Family doesn't treat children the way your mother treated Emma," Jack said firmly. "We're behind you 100%. My brother Andy remained caught between loyalties until he witnessed Emma's reaction to seeing a woman who resembled our mother at a shopping mall. Her panic attack in the middle of the toy store, her small body shaking uncontrollably as she gasped for breath, finally opened his eyes to the reality of the trauma. "I didn't want to believe it was this bad," he admitted later, his face ashen. "Mom's always been strict, but this is something else." With Andy's support came access to family information I hadn't previously known. He revealed that our maternal grandmother had cut ties with several family members over perceived slights, isolating our mother as a child, much as she now attempted to isolate me. "It's a pattern," Andy realized. "Mom's repeating what was done to her." Understanding the generational nature of the abuse didn't excuse it but helped me contextualize my mother's behavior. The cycle had continued unbroken from grandmother to mother to me until now. With each step we took to protect our children, we were actively breaking a pattern that had damaged our family for generations. Professional help became our cornerstone. Dr. Reed worked with Emma weekly, using play therapy to help her process her trauma. A different therapist specialized in helping Tyler understand that the adult manipulation he'd experienced wasn't his fault, and that keeping secrets that made him uncomfortable was never his responsibility. David and I attended both individual and couples therapy, learning to recognize the subtle ways my mother's influence had shaped our parenting decisions and relationship dynamics. I discovered that my tendency to guess myself, to seek external validation for parenting choices, stemmed directly from years of having my judgment undermined by my mother's criticism. "You're rebuilding your confidence as a mother," my therapist observed during one session, recognizing that your instincts about your children are valid and valuable. Small victories accumulated. Emma went 3 nights without wetting the bed. Tyler raised his hand in class again. David's firm expressed support after learning the full context of our family situation. I found my voice in parent-teacher conferences, no longer automatically deferring to authority figures as I'd been conditioned to do. The restraining order provided breathing room, but my mother's campaign continued in subtler ways. Gossip circulated among extended family. Anonymous calls to Child Protective Services prompted an investigation that, while quickly dismissed, left us shaken. A letter arrived from her attorney, formally requesting grandparent visitation rights and implying deficiencies in our parenting. "She's escalating because she's losing control," Dr. Reed explained. "Each boundary you establish threatens her sense of authority." Then came the most shocking attempt yet. On a Wednesday afternoon in early March, Emma's preschool called in a panic. "Mrs. Henderson, there's been another incident," the director said, her voice tense. "Your mother arrived claiming to be picking up Emma for a dental appointment. When we refused based on the restraining order, she became hostile. She claimed you were unfit and that she had documentation proving it. The police have been called. By the time I arrived, my mother had been escorted from the property, but not before creating a scene that frightened the entire preschool. The school had been placed on lockdown, with scared 4- and 5-year-olds huddled in classrooms, while teachers tried to maintain calm. Emma was in the director's office, her eyes wide with terror, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. When she saw me, she launched herself into my arms with a sob that came from somewhere primal. "Grandma said you didn't want me anymore," she whispered against my neck. "She said I was coming to live with her now." The violation of both the legal restraining order and Emma's sense of security was the final breaking point. That evening, after the children were asleep under David's watchful eye, I drove to the police station to file formal charges for violation of the restraining order. "Your mother will likely be arrested," the officer explained gently. "Are you prepared for that?" The question gave me pause. Was I ready to see my mother in handcuffs, to be the cause of her public humiliation? The conditioned guilt rose up, nearly choking me. Then I remembered Emma's face today, the terror in her eyes, the lie she'd been told that her mother didn't want her anymore. I thought of Tyler carrying adult secrets, his childhood burdened by manipulation. I recalled my father's final letter, his regret for not protecting me sooner. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm prepared for whatever is necessary to keep my children safe." The arrest made local news. A small item about a grandmother violating a restraining order against her grandchildren. The public exposure my mother had always feared most had become reality, and her response was swift and vicious. Her attorney filed emergency petitions alleging parental alienation. Flying monkeys descended in the form of distant relatives and family friends, each reaching out to express concern about my mental state. A whisper campaign suggested David was abusive, that I was unstable, that the children were at risk in our care. In the midst of this storm, unexpected support arrived from my father's sister, Aunt Patricia, who had maintained limited contact with our family after a falling out with my mother years earlier. "Your mother did the same to your father," she revealed during a long phone call. "Isolated him from his family, controlled every aspect of his life. I tried to warn him, but by then, he was too deep in her web. When you were born, I hoped things would change, but they only got worse. She saw you as an extension of herself, not as your own person." Aunt Patricia provided critical family history that helped our legal case, establishing a pattern of controlling behavior spanning decades. She also sent copies of letters my father had written to her over the years, documenting his growing concerns about my mother's treatment of me, and later, her unhealthy interest in my children. Armed with this historical context, our lawyer felt confident opposing the grandparent visitation petition. We can demonstrate a consistent pattern of behavior that would make visitation detrimental to the children's well-being, she explained. By early April, the legal proceedings had taken on a momentum of their own. My mother's violation of the restraining order had strengthened our position considerably. Her increasingly erratic behavior, including a rambling letter to the family court judge that accidentally revealed her controlling mindset, further undermined her case. The final hearing was set for April 15th. As the date approached, my anxiety peaked. Would the judge understand the subtle psychological manipulation that had characterized my mother's abuse? Would the court see past her perfect exterior to the damage she'd caused? The night before the hearing, I sat on the edge of Emma's bed, watching her sleep. The worry lines that had aged her little face in recent months had begun to soften. Her therapist reported progress in helping her understand that adults sometimes behave badly and that it wasn't her fault. Tyler appeared in the doorway, his lanky frame silhouetted against the hallway light. "Is tomorrow the day?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I replied, patting the space beside me. He crossed the room and leaned against my shoulder, suddenly seeming younger than his 10 years. "Will I have to see Grandma?" "No, sweetheart. Your statement has already been recorded. You don't have to be there at all." He nodded, relief evident in the loosening of his shoulders. "Mom?" "Yes?" "I'm sorry I kept Grandma's secrets. I should have told you sooner." I wrapped my arm around him, pulling him close. "Tyler, none of this is your fault. Grandma put you in an impossible position. She was the adult. She was wrong, not you." "I was scared to tell," he admitted, his voice small. "She said you wouldn't believe me." The manipulation cut deep, designed to isolate him, just as I had been isolated as a child. "I will always believe you," I promised. "Always. And I will always protect you and Emma, no matter what." As I held my son, I felt a shift inside me, a final piece clicking into place. The frightened girl who had grown into a woman still seeking her mother's approval was gone. In her place stood a mother bear, fiercely determined to break the cycle of abuse that had damaged our family for generations. Whatever happened in court tomorrow, I knew with deep certainty that my children would never experience the conditional love and manipulation that had shaped my childhood. The fight wasn't just legal, it was a battle for our family's future, for my children's sense of security and self-worth. And it was a fight I was now fully prepared to win. The family court building loomed before us, its red brick exterior somehow both imposing and ordinary. David squeezed my hand as we climbed the steps, our attorney Judith walking slightly ahead, her confident stride reassuring. "Remember," she said, turning to face us at the entrance, "stick to the facts. Let the documentation speak for itself." Judge Reynolds has reviewed all the evidence, including the children's statements and professional evaluations. Inside, the hallway buzzed with muted conversations and the rustle of legal papers. We were directed to courtroom 3, where a handful of people already waited on wooden benches. My mother sat on the opposite side, her posture rigid in a conservative navy suit, her attorney whispering in her ear. She didn't acknowledge our arrival, though her gaze briefly flickered in our direction. "All rise," the bailiff called as Judge Reynolds entered, a woman in her 60s with silver, streaked hair, and attentive eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The hearing proceeded with formal precision. Lawyers presented arguments regarding the restraining order violation and the grandparent visitation petition. Psychological evaluations were entered into evidence. Dr. Reed's assessment of the children's trauma was read aloud, her professional opinion that contact with their grandmother would be detrimental to their recovery. When my turn came to speak, I approached the witness stand with surprisingly steady legs. Under Judith's careful questioning, I recounted the New Year's Eve incident, the discovery of my mother's manipulation of Tyler, and the school lockdown situation. My voice remained calm, even as I described Emma's bleeding lip and terrified eyes. My mother's attorney attempted to paint me as unstable, suggesting I was alienating the children from their loving grandmother out of personal vendetta. He implied that one slap, while regrettable, hardly justified severing family ties. "Mrs. Henderson," Judge Reynolds interjected after a particularly pointed question, "would you describe your concern as being about one isolated incident or something larger?" I met her gaze directly. "Your Honor, The slap that injured my daughter was the visible manifestation of a pattern that has existed my entire life. My mother's need for control, her manipulation of my children, her deliberate undermining of our family bonds, these aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a consistent pattern of behavior that has now harmed 2 generations. The judge nodded thoughtfully. And what outcome are you seeking today? Protection for my children, I replied simply. The space and security they need to heal from the confusion and fear they've experienced. The chance to develop healthy boundaries without manipulation. When my mother took the stand, she presented herself as the concerned grandmother, intervening only because of worries about her grandchildren's welfare. She admitted the slap was perhaps too harsh but justified it as old-fashioned discipline that children today supposedly needed. Her composure cracked, however, when questioned about the secret meetings with Tyler and the lies she'd told him about our family. I was preparing him for inevitable changes, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. Children need structure, discipline. Olga allows those children to run wild. Someone needed to step in. And you felt entitled to make that decision? Judge Reynolds asked. I'm their grandmother, my mother replied, as if that explained everything. Yes, but Mrs. Porter, the judge continued, did you consult with the children's parents before initiating these private meetings? Before giving a 10-year-old boy a secret phone? Before telling him his parents were divorcing when they weren't? My mother's silence was more revealing than any answer could have been. After both sides presented closing arguments, Judge Reynolds called a brief recess to review final documentation. David and I sat in tense silence in the hallway, neither of us wanting to predict the outcome. Whatever happens, David said, taking my hand, we face it together. We've already come so far, Olga. He was right. Regardless of the legal ruling, we had already broken the cycle of silence and compliance that had allowed my mother's behavior to continue unchecked for decades. We had stood up for our children and for ourselves. When court reconvened, Judge Reynolds delivered her ruling with direct compassion. The court finds sufficient evidence that continued contact between the minor children and their grandmother, Gladys Porter, would be detrimental to their emotional and psychological well-being at this time. Therefore, the temporary restraining order is extended for 1 year, after which the situation may be reviewed if circumstances change significantly. Relief washed through me in a physical wave. Additionally, the judge continued, the petition for grandparent visitation rights is denied. This court recognizes the general value of grandparent-grandchild relationships, but not when that relationship has been characterized by manipulation, fear, and physical harm. She looked directly at my mother. Mrs. Porter, this court strongly recommends that you seek therapeutic intervention to address the controlling behaviors documented in these proceedings. Should you wish to repair your relationship with your family in the future, demonstrating meaningful change through professional help would be an essential first step. My mother's face remained impassive, but her white-knuckled grip on her purse betrayed her reaction. As the judge concluded the hearing, my mother rose stiffly and exited without looking in our direction, her attorney trailing behind. Outside on the courthouse steps, spring sunshine warmed my face as the weight of months of anxiety began to lift. It's over, I whispered to David. At least for now. 1 day at a time, he replied, his arms strong around my shoulders. We focus on healing now. The healing process proved neither quick nor linear, but over the following months, small victories accumulated into meaningful progress. Emma's nightmares gradually decreased in frequency. Tyler's grades improved as the burden of adult secrets lifted from his young shoulders. David's firm expressed their full support after understanding the family situation, even offering him flexibility during particularly difficult weeks. My relationship with Andy deepened as he processed his own complex feelings about our mother. I always knew something wasn't right, he admitted during a long conversation. But it was easier to go along with her expectations than to question them. It's what we were trained to do from birth, I replied without judgment. My classroom became a sanctuary again, as I returned to the teaching I loved, now with a deeper understanding of how children's home environments shaped their emotional security. My own experience informed a gentler approach with students who seemed anxious to please or fearful of making mistakes. Summer arrived with healing warmth. We decided to move forward with a long, planned vacation to the mountains, something the children had been looking forward to before our family crisis began. The cabin we rented overlooked a tranquil lake, far from cell service and the stresses of the past 6 months. On our third evening there, as David and I sat on the porch watching the children skip stones across the water's surface, Tyler's laugh rang out uninhibited, joyful, childlike. I realized with a start that I hadn't heard that particular laugh in nearly a year. "Listen to that," David said softly, clearly thinking the same thing. "They're coming back to themselves," I whispered, blinking back tears. As summer transitioned to fall, we established new family traditions to replace the ones that had centered around my mother. Instead of formal holiday dinners with perfect table settings and tense silence, we created messy pancake brunches where spills were met with paper towels, not criticism. Game nights filled our home with laughter that didn't need to be modulated to acceptable levels. Emma's 6th birthday party in October marked a particularly poignant milestone. As friends and classmates filled our backyard, Emma twirled in a princess dress, her confidence visibly restored. When she accidentally knocked over a cup of juice, her body tensed momentarily in remembered fear before she looked up at me with questioning eyes. "No big deal, sweetheart," I reassured her, already reaching for napkins. "Accidents happen." The relief in her small face as she nodded and returned to her friends reflected the gradual rebuilding of her sense of safety. Tyler's healing took different forms. He joined a youth robotics club, discovering a talent for engineering that thrived in an environment where trial and error were encouraged rather than punished. His therapist reported significant progress in processing the manipulation he'd experienced, noting his increasing ability to recognize unhealthy adult behaviors. "I delete texts now that make me feel weird," he told me one evening while working on a science project. "My friend Jason's cousin keeps trying to get us to keep secrets from our parents." And I told him no. Pride swelled in my chest at his newfound boundaries. "That was exactly right, Tyler. You never have to keep secrets that make you uncomfortable." "I know that now," he said simply, returning to his project with quiet confidence. By the time the anniversary of the New Year's Eve incident approached, our family had established a new normal. We decided to spend the holiday at home, just the 4 of us, creating positive memories to replace the traumatic ones. As midnight approached, we gathered in the living room in our pajamas, counting down the seconds with mugs of hot chocolate topped with excessive whipped cream, something my mother would have considered appallingly indulgent. 10, 9, 8. We chanted together, Emma bouncing with excitement on the sofa. 7, 6, 5. David's arm wrapped around my shoulders, solid and secure. 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year. Cheers and hugs followed, chocolate, sticky kisses and giggles as we welcomed the new year together, safe in the circle of genuine, unconditional love we'd fought so hard to protect. Later, after the children had finally gone to bed, David and I sat together in the quiet living room, reflecting on the year behind us. "I never realized how strong you are," he said, his voice soft with admiration. "To stand up to a lifetime of conditioning, to break that cycle for our kids." "I didn't know either," I admitted. "I always thought strength meant never showing weakness, never admitting when you're hurt. That's what my mother taught me. But real strength is vulnerability, isn't it? Being honest about the painful things so they can be healed." He nodded, taking my hand. "What you did this year was the hardest thing I've ever watched anyone go through, and you did it for them." He gestured toward the stairs leading to our sleeping children. "And for us," I added, "all of us deserved better." 1 year after the night that had changed everything, I found myself standing in the doorway of Emma's bedroom, watching her peaceful sleep. The worry lines that had aged her little face had disappeared completely. Beside her bed sat a journal, where she now drew pictures of her feelings each day, part of the therapeutic process that had helped her reclaim her sense of security. In Tyler's room across the hall, model rockets lined the bookshelf, testament to his rediscovered enthusiasm for learning and exploration. His schoolwork had returned to its previous excellence, but more importantly, the shadow behind his eyes had lifted. The path forward still held challenges. My mother occasionally tested the boundaries of the restraining order through proxy contacts or coincidental appearances in places she knew we might be. Each incident was documented, each boundary reinforced. The court's recommendation that she seek therapy, appeared to have gone unheeded, her patterns unchanged. Yet within our immediate family, profound transformation had occurred. The generational cycle of control, fear, and conditional love had been broken. My children would grow up knowing that mistakes were opportunities for learning, not weapons for shame. They would understand that love didn't require perfection or compliance. They would carry forward a new family legacy based on respect, emotional safety, and the courage to speak difficult truths. As I made my final nighttime rounds, checking doors and turning off lights, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me stood straighter than she had a year ago, her eyes clearer, her purpose defined. I recognized in that reflection, not just myself, but echoes of my father's gentle strength and hints of the woman I might have become earlier had I been raised with the security I now fought to give my children. "We did it, Dad," I whispered to his memory, touching the frame that held a photo of him with Tyler and Emma. We broke the cycle. The most profound lesson of our painful year had become crystal clear. Sometimes the greatest act of love is drawing a line that says no further. Sometimes protecting those you love means standing firmly against those who would harm them, even when those people share your blood. And sometimes the family you fight hardest to protect is the one you've created, not the one you were born into. Our story wasn't perfect. The healing wasn't complete. But we were moving forward together, with truth, courage, and the unshakable knowledge that we had faced our darkest fears and emerged stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected than before. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect someone you love, even when it meant going against family expectations or traditions? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that speaking your truth can help others find the courage to speak theirs. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing up for yourself and your loved ones is an act of strength, not betrayal. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to protect what matters most in your life.